China's Ministry of Commerce seemed to take the high road on Thursday, calling for the right conditions to be made so that trade negotiations can continue. Gao Feng, the ministry's spokesperson, said the most pressing issue to discuss is cancelling further U.S. tariffs on $550 billion worth of Chinese goods. What message is China now sending to the U.S. side? What's the rationale behind it, and how might the White House respond? Joining me for the discussion are here in Beijing, Professor Gong of the University of International Business and Economics, and from Hong Kong, Koepp, Director of the Economist Corporate Network. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. First of all, let's take a listen of exactly what Gao Feng, the spokesperson of the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, said just on Thursday.
中方的反制手段是充足的。
China has sufficient countermeasures, but I think both countries need to focus on how to eliminate punitive tariffs and prevent the trade war from escalating. For now, talks between China and the U.S. are underway. I want to reiterate that trade war hurts China as much as it hurts the U.S. and the rest of the world, and might have disastrous consequences.
So, some interesting messages coming out there, right, gentlemen? For instance, China says the real issue that needs to be discussed now is how to eliminate the punitive tariffs on $550 billion US worth of Chinese goods. Some other English translation says the real issue to discuss is how to cancel further tariffs on $550 billion US worth of Chinese goods. By the way, $550 billion US, that's the entirety of Chinese goods that are subject to additional tariffs that's exclusively applied to Chinese goods. To cancel further tariffs on these goods, what does that mean, John?
Well, I think this message from the Ministry of Commerce spokesperson is a determined message, and also I think it's also a conciliatory message calling for de-escalation, calling for cancellation of additional tariffs, also calling for further negotiation. To be honest with you, I'm a little bit skeptical that these tariffs will be additional tariffs will be cancelled by September 1st, before the negotiation, the scheduled negotiation, is going to take place in Washington, D.C. the first week of September. So I think overall it's just calling for a truce, I think, and I'm a little bit hopeful that the other side will heed the call and let's sit down and talk.
So let me ask you this question, because I think a lot of American audiences. By the way, we're just joined by Jimmy Zhu, Chief Strategist for Fullerton Research from Shanghai. Mr. Zhu, thank you and welcome to The Point. So we were just talking about the spokesperson from China's Ministry of Commerce talking about, let's create the conditions. Of course, he didn't say that China creates the conditions. He said China and the United States, I believe, need to create the conditions for the negotiations to continue. John just talked about this being a reconciler message from the Chinese side. Mr. Zhu, how do you read it? Do you think that the Chinese Ministry of Commerce is coming out to, wave the olive branch and say, truce, let's sit down and behave like adults, or is it because of some other reasons?
Well, it's a very symbolic move, I think, but I think the strategy could be by the Chinese negotiator probably would be different, because in the past 1.5 years, what we see as the trade tensions between the two actually has never been de-escalated. It's always be escalated with some truce happen sometimes, but for this time, if China did not really retaliate at the first place, that probably actually would lay a very clear ground or very comfortable ground for the two actually have the chance to negotiate on September. Probably the negotiation on September, the meetings do carry on. And when we look at the Wall Street the reaction this afternoon, everything's still pretty positive. So I do see this is a positive move, at least to set the ground for the discussion for the two sides. I think that is very needed at this moment.
Rob, how do you read the messages there? having heard what our Chinese counterparts are saying, is that how you read? And what do you think are prompting China to come out and make this statement at this moment?
Well, I do agree with what the other commentators have said.
Sorry, this is for Rob in Hong Kong. Thank you, Mr. Zhu.
Sure, and to say I think what they were saying is a way to interpret what's unfolded. I think the positive side of it is indeed that it gives some breathing space. It's not so much, I guess, a truce, as John used the term from my perspective, as it is just a chance to, as we say, push pause and let the two sides think a little more calmly, perhaps, going forward. What we've seen, the whole notion of trade escalation uses the phrase tit for tat, which just means you do something, I do something. It's this reactive concept. And I think to stop the reacting for a while and try to think through a solution is going to benefit both sides. So in that sense, it's a largely, you could say, positive development, just because it's not making things worse.
It's very interesting that the Chinese side come out and say this, because it has always been the United States to provoke a new round of tariffs despite very strong objection, and round after round, and making it bigger, expanding the scope of the goods, and making the tariffs higher and higher. John, do you think the Chinese side do not risk looking weak in front of such very aggressive rhetoric, at least coming from the United States?
I don't think so. I think China did come back with a set of goods that are subject to additional tariffs in response to this first round of tariffs that President Trump imposed, which is actually out of no reason at all. After the 11th round of negotiation, we have to go back to the 11th round negotiation. They had a good talk, even though it's shorter than expected, but both sides issued a statement saying that they are constructive negotiations, they will continue to talk. And then out of blue, he sit in the office and came up with this idea that he wants to impose some tariffs just for that reason that he needs to go to somewhere for a political rally and needs something to brag about. I mean, that's how these things came about. And after a couple of weeks, China came back with a list of goods that are subject to tariff. I think the fact that China did come up with that list speaks volume about China's determination that it's not going to be bullied, it's not going to be backing off, it's going to be, negotiations should be on the same equal footing, not to be pushed around by this guy in Washington.
So, let me ask our next guest, who has just joined us on the line, Mr. Steve Pruitt, who is working for Watts Partners, and he is a former staff director of the U.S. House Congressional Budget Committee. Mr. Pruitt, I don't know how much you've heard of what we just talked about. The positive, that's been interpreted, the positive message coming out of the Chinese Ministry of Commerce is saying, let's stop escalating the tariffs, but rather create conditions for the resumption of trade negotiations. How do you read the content of this message and the timing that China came out just maybe 2-3 days, right, before the 1st of September, when the next batch of additional tariffs will come into effect from the Trump administration?
Well, I have held for some time that it is positive on all fronts that both sides be involved and engaged in discussions. I've had a concern as well, however, that the U.S. does not seem to have an agenda here other than to engage in the theater and the drama that we're seeing play out every day now in these discussions. And while I'm happy that the Chinese are again putting out a lump of sugar in hopes that the U.S. and more importantly President Trump will accept it, I'm not very optimistic that we're going to go anywhere. I think President Trump needs to have, as we say in America, a foil against which to fight, and the trade situation with China, for him at this point, is a perfect one. So I'm not very optimistic that this is going to lead to anything positive. I hope otherwise, but I'm not very optimistic.
Fair enough. I'm sure a lot of people share your sentiment as well. I want to ask this question, though. John, just now you talked about China does not fear looking weak, right? To call truce when there has been an escalation of rhetoric and tariffs. But on the other hand, I'm sure, well, I'm almost sure, let's say, this paragraph, these messages will be perceived by a lot of people in the media in the United States as a sign that, look, when President Trump acts tough, it works. Look, China is giving in. They can't sustain it anymore. They're calling truce. They're surrendering. So, John, how do you look at that?
Well, it's not surrendering. I mean, it's calling for talk. Well, President Trump has...
But they're going to interpret it that way, I'm 100% sure, having watched a little bit of what they talk about, especially on some of the media that particularly supportive of President Trump.
I understand that, but the fact of the matter is that it's also... look at how fast President Trump rushed to tweets telling the world that he got his phone calls, which, originally the Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson sort of denied. It's a very low-level calls, and he immediately rushed to tweets and bragged about it. I think he's probably equally eager to strike kind of a deal. So if people interpret China's stance as sort of a weak, I think his action in that aspect is even weaker. So he bragged a lot about in press release about how he got these phone calls, how China is eager to talk. So I think clearly he wants to talk as much as we want to talk.
Rob, how do you look at this issue? I mean, I understand the Chinese is trying to behave mature here and really, react to things in a calm manner and not be dragged into this very damaging, mutual hurting process. But on the other hand, if China is seen to be weak, then the supporters of Trump will be emboldened to think that if President Trump acts tough, China is going to give in. So they will continue to root for Trump to go down a very radical path that he has been on. Rob, what do you think of that?
Well, I think you make some good points, Liu Xin, but my main argument would be it matters less to consider what the other side thinks. I think that's one of the big problems, actually, that has resulted in this sort of escalating tensions we've seen. China is very concerned about its face on the global stage. Trump is probably the most concerned of all U.S. presidents in recent memory about his personal image as well as that of the United States. And the problem with that is you get in this spiraling effect of who looks tougher, who sounds tougher, and it doesn't have a lot to do with substance. If I were advising the State Council in Beijing, I'd be saying, look at the long game. It really doesn't matter if Fox News or other supporters of Donald Trump think China is weak or not. How is the Chinese economy doing? Can it benefit by taking another approach? Could China benefit by, for example, opening up more? We just had a discussion today in Shanghai with Elon Musk, and he's setting up one of the first, in fact, the first fully owned foreign manufacturer for cars. In this case, new electronic vehicles. So that's great. I mean, new energy vehicles are a way forward, and China letting in an American businessman like that is great for China. It doesn't matter if Trump thinks that's because of him. It actually had nothing to do with President Donald Trump, and it's a great move forward for China. Do more of that. I think China's economy will benefit, regardless of what Donald Trump's supporters think.
Well, I would really love to agree with you, and I actually do agree with you, but I just hope that, when people talk about such development, they will not twist things to make it look what it is not. I'm sure it is in China's interest and it is in the United States' interest to de-escalate the situation. Actually, I want to read all paragraphs, some of this open letter that has been signed by 160 associations, business associations from across the United States, which was addressed to President Trump on August the 28th. It says it's from this coalition called Americans for Free Trade, and it says that on behalf of the Americans for Free Trade Coalition, we are writing with an urgent request that you, President Trump, postpone all tariff rate increases on Chinese goods that are scheduled to take effect this year. These tariff rate increases, some starting as early as Sunday, come at the worst possible time, right in the middle of the busy holiday shipping period. Furthermore, because many of our industrial inputs are still sourced in China, these new tariffs will act as a tax on U.S. manufacturers and U.S. farmers whose costs will now increase, and so on and so forth. So really a lot of associations have signed up to it. We're seeing the Beer Institute, we're seeing California Retailers Association, we're seeing American Association of Exporters and Importers, and American Association of Port Authorities, American Bakers Association. I can go on, from Idaho, from Illinois, from Indiana, from from Los Angeles, from Maine, from Louisiana, Motorcycle Industry Council, and also from San Diego, from the Hardwood Federation, the Toy Association, Travel Goods Association, Truck and Engine Manufacturers. So, John, you're smiling, but let me go to Jimmy, who is in Shanghai. Jimmy, what do you get? These people writing letter with such strong words of urgent request. What do they want to tell President Trump, and is he likely to heed it?
I think in the past few months I think some companies in the U.S. actually they do looking for the alternative actually outside China. But look at the countries nearby, like Vietnam, like Thailand. Yes, the labor cost is low, but the labor market also is pretty tight there. And a lot of companies actually they leaving China is not because of the trade war, it's because of the high labor costs here. So without China, I don't think those kind of supply chain can change overnight. So look at the current environment. The trade wars initiated by Trump that is only increase the cost by the Americans, by the American companies. So I don't see there's a lot of point and on the business angle for Trump to continue to exercise that.
But some people are arguing, again, I'm talking about people's perception of what's happening. Some people are arguing, you know, a little bit of pain is necessary and Americans have to live with this pain. John, is this pain necessary? And can the Americans live with this pain?
Well, this is essentially the argument promulgated by Stephen Bannon before he left office. And I think to some extent now, President Trump probably bought into this, and he had a press interview just a few days ago saying that he needs to take on China, like it or not. It's probably not good for the economy in the U.S. It's probably good for the U.S. economy, but no matter what, in the short run, this is something we have to do. So I think he's probably having this sort of a historical mission thinking in his mind that this is something that he has to do. I think this is very worrisome. It's a very different development from his earlier stance on trade. I mean, restricting this battle just on trade and economic issues. Now you're talking about sort of a geopolitical dimension of this, sort of a more of a long-term perspective that framing this battle in the Thucydides trap. And I think this is very dangerous. But the bottom line is that President Trump's mind is very difficult to read. But he says one thing, a day, and then the very next day he changes his mind.
To these associations, to these business associations, why are they really? I mean, it's desperation I'm sensing here.
Well, the people are very desperate right now. I mean, we're talking about hitting consumers' pockets with somewhere between $700 to $1,000 a month, a year, and these companies. These associations, 160 of them, representing probably hundreds of thousands of American businesses, it's right hitting their pocket. I mean, you're talking about their outsourcing cost is increasing. They have to pass on these costs to their consumers, which would dampen demand, for example. And we're rapidly getting into the holiday season. So at some point, a lot of these companies have very low margins, and some of them are small businesses, and they have to respond by laying off people. Yeah. So this is something very serious. So I think that's why they're sort of a very desperate move to craft a letter like this, open letter like this, and calling for some help from the president.
However, we're only 2-3 days before September the 1st, when the next batch of additional tariffs are supposed to go into effect. Rob, observing from your perspective, do you think such letters will make a difference for President Trump? Do you think China's call for de-escalation of the current tension is going to make a difference?
Well, they can. I mean, the current U.S. president takes a lot of pride in being business savvy. He has a business background. He, earlier in his administration, had a council of business leaders that were advising him. So I think he doesn't utterly ignore these sorts of letters. But at the same time, if it isn't what he wants to hear, I don't know if he heeds it that closely. But to that point, yes, there's some influence. And to your other point, I think the gesture from China, he probably does look at favorably. And, you know, reflecting back on your earlier question, Liu Xin, I don't think it matters what he makes of it. It's that if he sees that as something positive and a reason for more engagement, that's best for both sides. I mean, he has a very contradictory attitude about his relationship with China's president, Xi Jinping, where he, in one turn, will refer to him as a great friend, and in another turn, call him an enemy. So, you know, he seems to be of two minds about a lot of things, including that relationship. But I think generally, he's, in his own thinking, tried to act positively. I know in China it's not often viewed that way, but I think in the U.S. president's mind, he has been trying to make things work. So I think where we are now is good for both sides, because it will probably encourage him, both the U.S. business encouragement that he renegotiate, and as well as the Chinese gesture not to further retaliate. I think that opens a door that he can walk through.
You know, so refreshing to hear people talk positive, talk constructive, and encourage people to be aired out, to be mature, instead of saying, go for it, you know, beat China, and if you don't do it now, it's going to be too late. I would like to believe that President Trump really means well, and to be fair, he has been respectful to the Chinese president, except in one case where he compared him with the chairman of the Federal Reserve and asking who is the bigger enemy. But
which is extraordinary itself.
Yeah, yeah, but I think
you'd call either person an enemy. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for now he has, for most part, been respectful to the Chinese leadership, and I also understand the kind of political pressure he is under. However, he is also under some pretty bad influence, and I think a lot of Chinese people will really agree with that. I think although President Trump could be very well-wishing, some of his advisors are really very tough and very anti-China. I don't think it's an overstatement there. So given these circumstances, this olive branch, will it be reciprocated by, or received well by the Trump administration? John?
I think it will be. I think he's already talking about this.
You want to bet on that?
I think, well, at least I would be willing to bet that the scheduled meeting will take place in Washington in early September. It looks like it will. It looks like it will.
You have so much confidence.
I have a little bit of confidence in that. I think President Trump talked about this. Clearly, our Ministry of Commerce spokesperson was talking about this. So I think that meeting at least is going to take place.
But you know, again, I want to ask this question. We are just 2 or 3 days away from the 1st of September, and China says the most important thing to discuss now, or the real issue to discuss now, is to avoid further increase, further tariffs on $550 billion. Does that mean that President Trump really needs to react very swiftly over the next day or two?
That I'm a little bit skeptical. I don't think he's going to cancel his earlier decision to impose taxes on September 1st without talking to the Chinese side. I think he's probably going to impose these tariffs, and it's going to last for some time, and hopefully. Well, we also have to keep in mind that a lot of exemptions in these tariffs, so I think it's not that bad as people might think.
Yeah, Jimmy, what is your take? How do you think the White House is going to react to China's message here, and also possibly to the letters, you know, the call of delay on the tariffs from American businesses people?
I think the White House call and the Trump's call probably is very different, and I still believe the U.S. negotiation team actually they want a deal, but the Trump's objective seems not very clear now, and whether his objective is to make a deal with China to benefit both countries, especially for the U.S., or his deal is just want to show the public that he's take harsh on China, then this is his political success. At this moment, I think it's still not very clear. So I think today is a very good opportunity for us to see what Trump really wants, because I think there's a chance that China not to retaliate immediately, and if the Trump team and still want to negotiate and the meetings happens, then I think there probably will be some partial deal happen toward the end of the year. But if, let's say, the Trump still want to carry on to talk about, let's say, his success to take on China, then I do see that probably the things will be go escalate again. But I think the September employment data also very important, because after what we see that recently, the U.S. employment, the U.S. Manufacturing data, retail sales jobs a bit fall and a bit slowed down. So if the employment rate the unemployment rate still slightly go higher, then I do see there's a need for Trump to make a deal. So the economic data also plays.
Okay, Jimmy, tell us a little bit about how China has been affected by the tariff. I'm going high here because I'm not going to pretend that the tariff escalation has not hurt China. But you know, we have to be fair. We have to let our audience know really what has been happening. I understand the Chinese government position has been that actually China has been steady, right, under pressure. The resilience has emerged, and that the Chinese economy actually is stable, and actually there has been also slight progress, slight increase as well in terms of its GDP growth. What is your assessment of the damage that has been inflicted by the tariff war?
I think now the damage is still remain on the confidence side. I mean, when we look at the credit data last month, despite the PBOC actually is making the Shibor rates, influence the Shibor rates to the 10 years low level, but when we look at the credit data is still pretty low. So lots of companies now at this moment, I think they want to wait and see at this moment. So the business confidence level is definitely low. But I do see that small companies surprisingly.
Yeah. Sorry,
yeah,
please finish your
actually
sentence.
The
yes.
smaller companies actually not.
Okay, okay, you want to leave it there. Rob, let me go to you. I would like to hope that you know, no more tariffs could be in place. Unfortunately, both from China and from the United States, on September the 1st, there will be new tariffs coming in, and 2 or 3 days is not enough for the two sides to secure any kind of truce agreement. So what's going to happen come Sunday?
Well, we're going to have the official announcement from the U.S. side, at least, on the list of goods to be tariffed. And you're quite correct, I think, Liu Xin, that those tariffs will be coming forward on both sides. I mean, China also announced its $75 billion, part of that to start on September 1st, and then again on December 15th. They're breaking up the allotment in two groups. Same for the U.S., also September 1st and December 15th. So I think what we can hope for is that the meetings take place. You know, you can always rescind tariffs. We've seen that. We've seen this threat of tariffs, you know, then taken back because there's progress, and you can always remove tariffs. So there's still a chance that these could be rolled back even after they're implemented. All right. And there's a way to bring everything back to a better level.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Let's wait and see. Many thanks to Rob Koepp in Shanghai, Gong here, Rob Koepp in Hong Kong, Gong here in Beijing, and Jimmy Zhu in Shanghai. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.